Well, good morning, good day, good evening, good night, wherever you dial in. I appreciate you dialing in for another one of our videos. Today's topics, we're looking at the Perizzites, not the parasites, but the Perizzites with two Z's. This is one of several groups that were occupying the land of Canaan as early as the time of Abraham, who God first saw that they were greatly sinning, and most importantly, this land belonged to the descendants of Abraham, as God had told Abraham himself. So that was what we had the problem. And what we know of the Perizzites strictly comes from the Bible. There's no other source in regards to these people. So on this video, we're just going to briefly discuss who they are and what happened and go from there. So in Genesis 15, 18 to 21, we see what the Lord says. On that door, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham and said, to your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Canaanites, Kenizzites, Kadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Raphaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. So there's a lot of people there. I'm pretty sure at the time Abraham was like, wow, that's a lot of land. There's a lot of people there. But God said, nevertheless, I'm promising you, I'm making a covenant with you. This is for your descendants. So we see where they are first mentioned in Genesis and so obviously with the mentioning of them in Genesis, they had been around at that time. So Abraham was probably familiar with who this tribe or these people were. The name Perizzite comes from means villagers, and denotes those who lived in the open country rather than larger walled cities. So these people were not necessarily, by their description, people who cared so much about cities or towns, so to speak. They didn't care for civilization, from what we can glean from their name. That's very important. Now, the region that they dwelt in was this region south and west of Mount Carmel in the fertile central portion of Canaan at that time. Now we look in Exodus 3:18 and 7. When God spoke to Moses at the burning bush, he detailed his plan to deliver the people from slavery in Egypt to the land of promise. The Lord mentioned the Perizzites among the 6 nations living in a good and spacious land, a land of milk, flowing with milk and honey. So again, we see where God says they're there. So they're in this place. So the time of Abraham all the way to Moses, we know that these people dwelt in this part of the land. Exodus 23:24, God commanded the destruction of the Perizzites along with 5 other nations. These pagan nations occupied the Canaan where enemies of God, and the Lord wanted Israel to expel them from the land. At the same time that he heard the cries in Egypt for his people, the groaning of them, at the same time he was hearing their plight in Egypt, he was also very upset, and he's had enough of the sin of these tribes living in this promised land. So at the same time, he's like, okay, I'm tired of seeing this. This has got to go. At the same time, I hear you calling. I hear you wailing. I hear you moaning. I hear your pain, and I'm going to pull you out of Egypt. So we're going to start this plan and get the ball rolling. So it's very important there that we look at that. So we see where there's a detailed plan of God throughout these books of the Bible, books or scrolls, whatever you want to call them, throughout the storyline of the Old Testament. And God is being faithful to his promise. Now, in Deuteronomy 7:1-3, he gave the people of Israel these instructions. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess and drive out the many nations before you, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. So God's given specific instructions. Take no prisoners. These people are very sinful. They live in a sinful manner. They worship idols, idolatry. To what extent the sins were so bad, we don't know the details. Okay, now we know more about, for instance, the Hittites and the Amorites and the Canaanites than we do about some of these others. And I think that the Hittites and the Hivites are somewhat similar. But with the Perizzites, we really don't know exactly what the sin was, what their culture was, or anything like that. Okay, but the bottom line is, God said they are unholy, they are very sinful, and I do not want you mixing with them. So God laid this law down to them and told them this is how serious that it should have been. So now, when Israel entered the promised land under Joshua, the Perizzites were living in the forested hill country, and we see that in Joshua 11:3. And that territory would be assigned to Ephraim, Manasseh, and Judah. And we see that in Joshua 17:15. So we kind of have an idea, if we look at the map, where those tribes are located. And what Joshua was in the book of Joshua, chapter 11, we get some boundaries, get an idea of what region that they were living in. Now, when we look at Judges 3:5-6, and Ezra 9:2, we read that the people of Israel had not completely driven them out. No surprise there. So a lot of times when they were given the instruction to drive them out for their own good, not marry them, not have anything to do with them, wipe them out, they did not do this. They thought it would be best, okay, now we got slaves, even though we ourselves were slaves at one time. Despite what God told them, they did not wipe out these nations. They let a remnant of these nations survive. Instead, God's people intermarried with the Perizzites and other inhabitants of Canaan in disobedience to God's command. No surprise. The Israelites worshiped the gods of Canaan and allowed themselves to be morally polluted by these pagan peoples. So the nations, so to speak, of the Perizzites and these other nations were subjugated, not completely wiped out. The majority of them probably were wiped out. However, the Israels, they probably saw the daughters and liked what they saw. They saw manual labor and said, let's keep them to help us build our nation. Using human thinking rather than God's instruction. So, and having those pagans do their worship and their beliefs among them and intermingling with them drove, a lot of the Jewish people away from God. So it did pollute their faith, as we see throughout the Old Testament. Now, what happened to them after Judges and Ezra? In 1 Kings is our last mention of them in chapter 9, 20-21. During the reign of Solomon, the remaining non-integrated Perizzites were forced to serve as slave laborers. So we see that even up until the time of King Solomon, Perizzites were mentioned. The Perizzites were mentioned by name, by ethnic, by what they are. So, and that's pretty much the last time that we see anything about them at that point. Now, outside the Bible, what do we have? We don't have any historical or archaeological source outside the Bible in regards to who these people are, what they believed, or what kind of societal structure that they had. Being a people living in the open and on the land, they would not have had any resemblance of civilization, structural to architect or monument. Like many other tribes living in the regions, they were eventually assimilated into dominant cultures that flourished in the region as time wore on. Yes, when I wrote that was pretty much what I'm thinking now, is the reason why we don't know too much about these people is because if you look at the region over time, of course, we have the Greeks with Alexander the Great. He comes along and he wipes, he kind of integrates this whole society under the Greek law and culture. And then Rome follows after that, but in between we have the Seleucid empires, the Ptolemies, and stuff like that. And with all this, blood lineage pollution, so to speak, or ethnic pollution, we just have eventually the Perizzites, along with many others, were eventually absorbed, integrated into the larger portions of society, and they eventually just, as time wore on, whatever identity they had disappeared. So and they're gone. So we really have no source of who these people are, what they are, what they did, what they believed in. What we do have is what matters, is the fact that God said that they were a sinful society, they were a pagan society, and they were part of those remnants that helped, well, not helped, but assisted in the children of Israel falling by the wayside and getting sinning and being polluted with their faith because of those beliefs that they believed in. Okay, it doesn't matter what they believed, who they believed, what gods they worshipped. The bottom line is it wasn't God, therefore it was wrong. So, and that's pretty much all we know. And they pretty much disappeared with the passage of time. Okay. All right, thanks for watching. I appreciate you. I know it's a very short video, but however, it's a very short subject. So there's not a lot to these people, who they were or anything like that. So, but they are briefly mentioned in the Bible, and we know what area that they lived in and thrived in, and eventually were subjugated and perished, and eventually wiped out through time, as time wore on. All right, and that's it, and I appreciate you dialing in. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. Hit the like button, subscribe. That helps our channel. As always, we'd love to have you here at Webb Baptist. If you can come and worship with us, we'd love to have you as our honored guest. If you can't make it to Webb Baptist, please get plugged into a Bible-based church wherever you're at, and find out what God has in store for you. I guarantee you, you will be a blessing to that church family, as that church family will be a blessing to you. Okay? Until next time, take care and God bless.